The cold winds blew softly over the narrow sea as Daenerys Targaryen stood on the deck of her ship, staring toward the western horizon. Behind her, the cities of Slavers Bay burned in the memories she chose not to make. She had decided not to sail to Meereen. The stories of rebellion and suffering from there didn't pull her heart this time. Her mind was set on Westeros. Her dream wasn't to be a queen of ashes or a ruler of broken chains in a foreign land. She wanted the Iron Throne and nothing else. Sir Jorah Mormont stood beside her, his face calm but unsure. "Khaleesi," he said gently, "Meereen could have given you an army, followers, and respect. It's not wise to ignore it." But she shook her head. "I am done being a savior to strangers. My destiny lies in Westeros. The longer I stay here, the more roots I grow in a land that isn't mine." With that decision, her ships turned west instead of east. The dragons flew above, their cries echoing across the sea. Rhaegal, Viserion, and Drogon sensed her mood. Hungry for more than just fire, they longed for purpose. Without Daenerys in Meereen, the city fell into chaos. The fighting pits reopened under cruel hands. The Sons of the Harpy grew in power, and slavery returned stronger than before. But Dany didn't know this, or perhaps she chose not to care. By the time they reached Dawn, her name had already begun to spread, not just as the mother of dragons, but as the queen who had finally set sail for Westeros. The Martells welcomed her with open arms. Illyria's Sand, bitter from the loss of Oberyn, saw Daenerys as a weapon against the Lannisters. A Targaryen queen with dragons? That was fire made flesh, a perfect revenge. So a new alliance was born. Dawn would support Daenerys, not only with ships, but with soldiers and spies. In return, Dany promised justice, not just for Oberyn, but for the whole kingdom suffering under Lannister rule. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister felt the storm coming. Her spies brought whispers of a silver-haired queen with fire-breathing monsters. She tightened her grip on the crown. Her paranoia grew. She began to arrest anyone she thought might support Daenerys. Even small folk who wore red or gold were punished. Fear turned the capital silent. Back in Dragonstone, Daenerys took her first steps on Westerosi soil. The castle her ancestors had built felt cold and empty, but it was hers, a symbol that her blood still mattered. She stood in the war room, hand on the carved stone table, eyes set on the map. "This is where it begins," she whispered. Tyrion Lannister, now her hand, walked in and studied her. "You've changed, Your Grace." She nodded. "I am not the same girl who walked into fire for dragon eggs. I don't want to be a mother to cities anymore. I want to take back what's mine." "But at what cost?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. As ravens flew across the sky, carrying messages of war, Jon Snow in the north heard of the Dragon Queen's arrival. He didn't care for thrones or dragons. His eyes were on the Night King and the coming darkness. But he knew they would need allies, and if dragons were real, so was hope. So he rode south, carrying more than just warnings of the undead. He carried the weight of the living world. But Daenerys, far from Meereen's lessons and untouched by its harsh truths, was slowly turning into something else. Not a breaker of chains, but a conqueror. She didn't see herself as someone who needed to earn loyalty. She believed her birthright was enough. And that belief was the beginning of something dangerous. Jon Snow arrived at Dragonstone under a sky filled with storm clouds. The sea behind him roared like it knew the world was shifting. When he stepped onto the ancient stone steps, his heart was heavy, not with fear, but with a sense of urgency. No one else seemed to understand. The dead were coming, and yet the living were still busy fighting for chairs. Daenerys met him in the great hall, her dragons circling above like silent gods. She sat on the throne, calm but distant, her silver hair shining like moonlight. When Jon looked at her, he didn't see the stories. He saw a woman carved by fire, proud and ready to rule. "You're not here to bend the knee, are you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Jon stood straight. "I'm here to save the realm, not crown queens." The tension between them was sharp. Tyrion watched closely from the side, wondering if this meeting would build something or burn everything. Jon spoke of the Night King, the army of the dead, and the danger rising in the north. Daenerys listened, but her mind was already somewhere else. She didn't come all this way to fight ghosts. She came to reclaim a throne. "You expect me to fight for you," she said, "but you won't fight for me." "I expect you to fight for the living," Jon replied. That night, Dany stood on the cliffs of Dragonstone, watching her dragons fly above the sea. The wind whipped her hair, and the smell of salt filled the air. She thought of her father, the Mad King, and the crown he wore like a curse. She thought of Meereen, the city she'd never seen, and wondered if mercy had left her long before she set foot on Westeros. She whispered, "I'm not him. I'm not Aerys." But part of her wondered, what if she was becoming someone worse? In the capital, Cersei Lannister was already preparing for war. News of Jon and Daenerys joining hands made her furious. She called it a betrayal of the realm. To her, every alliance not made by her hand was treason. She met with Euron Greyjoy, promising him more than gold if he brought her the Dragon Queen's head. "The world will burn," she said, sipping wine, "but I will still be sitting on this throne." In the shadows of Fleabottom, Varys heard everything. The spider had returned to King's Landing in disguise, gathering whispers like coin. When he heard of Cersei's plan to use wildfire again, to destroy not only Daenerys but the entire city if needed, he knew the realm was in greater danger than ever. He sent a raven to Dragonstone. Back in the north, Sansa Stark ruled Winterfell in Jon's absence. Letters came daily, carrying rumors of dragons and queens. She didn't trust Daenerys, not because of her blood, but because of her hunger. "She was never tested the way we were," Sansa told Arya one night. "She wasn't broken, she was worshipped." Arya only nodded. "Worship turns people blind." Meanwhile, Jon and Daenerys stood in the dragon-glass caves beneath the island. He showed her the ancient carving, drawings made by the children of the forest and the first men, images of the White Walkers, of dragons, of battles long forgotten. "We need to stop them," Jon said, "or nothing will matter. Not the North, not the throne." For the first time, Daenerys looked unsure. These drawings didn't lie. This war was older than her family, older than her claim. And yet part of her still burned with the need to be queen. "I will help you," she said at last, "but when it's over, you will bend a knee." Jon didn't answer. He looked into the firelit walls of the cave and wondered which war would kill them first, the one with the dead or the one with the living. Outside, Drogon roared into the sky. And far beyond the wall, the Night King stood in silence, his icy blue eyes watching everything from the shadows. The great game had begun. And Daenerys, without the lessons of Meereen, without the scars of mercy and patience, was already choosing fire over peace. The days that followed on Dragonstone were full of uneasy silence and hidden tension. Jon Snow stayed longer than he wanted. He needed the dragon glass. He needed her dragons. But most of all, he needed Daenerys to understand that the real war wasn't in King's Landing. It was walking in the snow beyond the wall. But Daenerys had grown colder with each passing day. Her hunger for the Iron Throne was now more than just ambition. It was an obsession. She studied the Westerosi houses like enemies on a battlefield. Her council meetings turned harsh. Her tone grew sharper. Even Tyrion, who once admired her deeply, began to hesitate before speaking. "She is not the same," he whispered to Varys one evening, their voices low over candlelight. "Something in her is cracking." Varys nodded grimly. "She skipped the struggle, the pain that teaches leaders when to pause. Meereen would have humbled her. Here, no one dares say no to her. She listens to Jon," Tyrion added, unsure whether that was comfort or a warning. "But for how long?" Varys asked. Meanwhile, Daenerys ordered her first strike, a bold and brutal one. The Lannister army had just taken Highgarden, looting gold and grain for the crown. With her dragons and a full force of Dothraki riders, she ambushed them on the Rose Road. The sky rained fire. Drogon screamed through the clouds, burning wagons, men and armor alike. The Dothraki cut through soldiers with savage joy, blood painting the green fields red. Jaime Lannister fought bravely, but he saw a nightmare unfold, the face of Aerys's daughter riding a dragon, destroying thousands without a second thought. He nearly died that day. If not for Bronn pulling him into the river at the last second, he would have been ashes. When Jaime returned to King's Landing, coughing water and disbelief, Cersei simply poured another glass of wine. "She's her father's daughter," she said coldly. "Let the world see her fire. I'll wait until there's nothing left to rule but bones." Back in Dragonstone, Daenerys walked among the charred bodies, her face unreadable. She offered the remaining Lannister soldiers a choice: bend the knee or burn. Many knelt in fear, but Randyll Tarly and his son Dickon refused. Tyrion begged her to show mercy. "They're proud men, yes, but they're not traitors. Use them, don't kill them." But Daenerys only looked at him, her eyes calm, almost cold. They made their choice. With one word, Dracarys, she ended their lives. The fire roared. Tyrion turned away. Jon heard the news from the Northmen stationed in the south. He confronted her that night. "You didn't have to kill them," he said quietly. "They wouldn't follow me. So you burned them alive. I gave them a choice." Jon stepped closer. "That wasn't a choice. That was fear. You're becoming what you hate." Daenerys stared at him. Hurt flickered in her eyes, but it didn't last. "I'm becoming what I need to be." Jon didn't reply. In that moment he realized something dangerous. She was no longer listening to advice. She was chasing destiny. Back in Winterfell, Sansa received the news with quiet horror. "If she does this to soldiers," she told Arya, "what do you think she'll do to the people if they don't love her?" Arya didn't flinch. "Then she's just another queen with fire in her eyes." Far in the north, the snow began to fall heavier. Tormund and Beric watched from Eastwatch by the sea as shadows moved beyond the trees. "They're coming," Tormund muttered. "The dead don't care about thrones." But thrones were all the South could think about. Jon Snow decided it was time to prove his warnings were real. He planned a dangerous mission beyond the wall, to capture a white, bring it south, and show the world what was truly at stake. Daenerys refused at first, but when he said goodbye without asking her permission, something broke in her. She realized she was afraid, not of death, not of failure, but of losing the one person who didn't see her as a queen, but as a person. She watched his ship disappear into the sea and whispered to herself, "Come back." But deep down she knew, if he didn't, she'd lose the last part of her soul that still believed in love over power. Beyond the wall, the snow was not just cold, it was cruel. Jon Snow, accompanied by a small group including Tormund, Beric Dondarrion, the Hound and Gendry, moved carefully through the white silence, each step heavy with dread. Their mission was desperate, to catch a white and drag it south, to force Daenerys and Cersei to understand what was truly coming. But the land beyond the wall didn't forgive boldness. It punished it. The dead found them first. They came like a storm, thousands of them, their eyes glowing blue, their mouths open in silent screams. Jon's group fought fiercely, swords clashing, fire blazing, but they were surrounded too quickly. It was a trap, a cruel, clever one. As hope began to die, Jon looked to the sky, and then fire. Daenerys arrived like a goddess of war. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion cut through the dead with waves of flame. The snow turned to steam, the ice cracked beneath the dragon's fury. She had come for Jon, though she told herself it was for the war, for the mission. But her heart betrayed her. She had come for him. As they rescued the survivors onto Drogon's back, Jon held the rear, buying them time. He was about to mount the dragon when the Night King stepped forward, calm and deadly. He raised an icy spear. "No!" Daenerys screamed, but it was too late. The spear flew, slicing the air with terrible force, and pierced Viserion's chest. The dragon shrieked, flames bursting from its mouth as it crashed into the ice, bleeding fire and death. The ground shook. The dead roared. Daenerys froze, her soul ripping apart. One of her children, gone, killed by a monster born of winter and hate. Jon barely escaped with his life, pulled back by Benjen Stark in a final act of sacrifice. The others, wounded and shaken, flew back to Eastwatch in silence. The loss changed Daenerys. Back on Dragonstone, she stood on the cliffs again, this time with grief in her eyes and fire in her blood. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she simply stared at the sea where her dragon had fallen. When Jon woke days later, he found her sitting by his bed, quiet and pale. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She turned to him slowly. "They killed my child." Jon sat up, despite the pain. "And they'll kill everything else if we don't stop them." That night, he bent the knee. "Daenerys Stormborn," he said, voice low, "I'll follow you, not because of your name, not because of your name, not because of your dragons, but because I believe in you." And for the first time, that tear fell down her cheek. "I hope you still do, when all this is over," she whispered. They sailed to King's Landing under a fragile truce. Cersei agreed to a meeting after hearing of the captured White. Curious more than convinced, the Dragon Pit was chosen, an old place for ancient beasts, now the ground for a new kind of war. When Daenerys arrived, riding Drogon with the ashes of her pain behind her, the Lannisters watched in silence. Cersei smirked, but there was fear in her eyes. Euron faked jokes, but even he stepped back when the White charged, snarling, "Chain." The truth was undeniable. Death was coming. Jon explained the threat. Daenerys added her voice, promising a temporary truce if all sides joined to fight the dead. But Cersei played her game well. "I will help," she said smoothly, "if the king in the north remains neutral and does not choose sides in the war to come." All eyes turned to Jon, and he, honest, brave, and too noble for politics, told the truth. "I've already pledged myself to Queen Daenerys." The room shattered into silence. Cersei's face went cold. "Then we have nothing more to discuss." She walked away, her eyes full of quiet triumph. She had what she wanted, an excuse not to help, a reason to let them all burn while she tightened her hold. Tyrion followed her, tried to reason, tried to find mercy in the heart of a woman who had none. When he returned, he said she agreed, but no one noticed the way his hands shook. No one knew the deal he'd made. Back on Dragonstone, as preparations for war against the dead began, Daenerys stood beside Jon on the deck of her ship. Their hands brushed. The world was turning darker. Trust was thinning. Enemies were lying in the shadows, and far beyond, on the frozen lake where Viserion had died, the Night King raised his hand. The dragon's eye opened, bright blue, full of death. The undead dragon tore through the sky like a nightmare. Viserion, once Daenerys' beloved child, was now a weapon of death, reborn in ice, breathing blue fire. Under the Night King's control, he unleashed destruction on the wall, blasting through the ancient ice with terrifying force. At Eastwatch, the wall fell. Chunks of frozen history crashed into the sea. Screams filled the air. The dead poured through the gap like floodwater. Tormund and a few others barely escaped, but the war had begun, and Westeros was not ready. In Winterfell, Sansa received the news with a frozen expression. She looked toward the north, heart sinking. "He's coming," she whispered, "and we're too busy fighting each other." Arya stood beside her, gripping her dagger. "Let him come. We'll be ready." But the truth was, they weren't. Back in Dragonstone, Daenerys stood silent as Jon told her about the wall. She didn't speak for a long time. The fire inside her wasn't rage this time, it was fear. For the first time in her life, she didn't know if her dragons would be enough. Jon stepped closer. "We need to move north, now. Every moment we wait, people die." Daenerys looked at him, really looked. He had scars, burdens, and a truth in his eyes that reminded her of herself before the world crowned her queen. "We'll go together," she said. "We'll face him side by side." They set sail for Winterfell, but whispers were spreading faster than the wind. Samwell Tarly arrived with a truth that could burn everything. Jon Snow was not a bastard. He was Aegon Targaryen, the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, the true heir to the Iron Throne. Bran Stark confirmed it with the coldness of someone who no longer felt like a brother. "He's the song of ice and fire," Bran said to Sam. "The balance between dragon and wolf." Tyrion heard the whispers too, and though he said nothing, his heart sank. The woman he served was no longer the rightful heir, and the man she had grown close to might be the one to take everything from her. When Jon and Daenerys arrived in Winterfell, the tension was thick. The North didn't trust her. They didn't care about dragons. They remembered the Mad King. They saw a foreign queen with fire in her blood and cold in her eyes. Sansa greeted her with polite words, but steel in her voice. "What happens after the war?" she asked Daenerys privately. "Will the North still kneel to you?" Daenerys didn't answer. Meanwhile, Arya reunited with Jon, but even she noticed the change in him. He seemed torn, quieter. Something weighed on him heavier than ever before, the truth of his birth. Sam told Jon in the crypts, beneath the statues of the Starks, "Your name is Aegon Targaryen. You're the true heir to the Iron Throne." Jon stood frozen, his breath visible in the cold air. "That means Daenerys is my aunt?" Sam nodded. "She killed my father," Jon whispered, "and I still trusted her." "You're not like them," Sam said. "You've never wanted power. That's why you should have it." Jon didn't reply. His heart twisted in too many directions. Honor, love, blood, betrayal. Daenerys found out days later. Tyrion told her in secret, hoping she would understand. But when she heard Jon's true name, her world shattered. Everything she had fought for, every sacrifice, every battle, every drop of blood, now stood at risk of being taken away by someone she loved, someone who had a better claim. "I was born to rule," she whispered, "and now the world wants him instead." Tyrion tried to calm her, but she pulled away. "I crossed oceans. I lost a dragon. I bled for these people, and still they look at him." Her voice trembled, not with sadness but fury. At night, Jon came to her chamber. She looked at him with fire behind her eyes. "Is it true?" He nodded. "I don't want the throne," he said quickly. "I never did, but they will want you." "I won't let them," he said. "I'll tell them you're my queen." But the seed of doubt had already taken. Daenerys kissed him, but it was no longer the same. The kiss was filled with desperation, not passion. She was trying to hold on, not to love, but to power. And deep inside, she feared something worse than death, being forgotten. The cold crept in like a curse. Winterfell braced itself for the coming storm as snow began to fall heavier each day. The northern lords sharpened their swords, but their hearts were divided. Some whispered loyalty to Jon, calling him the true king. Others feared Daenerys, not for her dragons, but for the fire in her eyes that seemed to grow darker with each passing hour. Daenerys could feel it, the distance, the way people looked at Jon with quiet respect, but at her with suspicion. She had saved them with fire, come to fight for the living, yet she remained an outsider, a Targaryen, a threat. In the great hall, tensions rose like smoke. Sansa challenged her with careful words. Arya watched her with quiet judgment. Even Tyrion had grown quieter, slower to defend her. But none of that mattered anymore. The Night King had arrived. The horns blew at dawn. White Walkers appeared on the northern horizon like shadows in a snowstorm. Their army, endless, silent, monstrous, surrounded Winterfell. The living prepared for the last stand. Jon and Daenerys stood on the ramparts together, looking into the endless white. Her dragons circled above. She turned to him and said softly, "If I die, don't let the world forget who I was." Jon stared at her, his eyes full of sorrow. "You won't die." But even he didn't believe that anymore. The battle began. Whites crashed against the walls like waves. The Unsullied held the lines bravely. Dothraki riders charged into the darkness and vanished. Only flickers of their flaming swords remained before silence swallowed them whole. From above, Daenerys and Jon rode Drogon and Rhaegal into the storm. Fire met ice in the sky, lighting the world in flashes of fury. Viserion, now undead, fought them both, ripping through clouds with blue fire. Down below, Arya moved like a ghost through the halls, saving the weak, fighting the dead with deadly grace. Sansa stayed hidden in the crypts, where even the dead did not rest easy. Bran waited in the godswood, bait for the Night King, and he came. The Night King arrived without a word, walking through fire untouched, eyes fixed only on Bran. Jon tried to stop him, ran through falling snow and broken bodies, but was blocked by Viserion, blue fire between him and the godswood. Daenerys saw Jon trapped. She dove with Drogon, fire roaring down at the Night King. He stood still, flames swallowed him whole, and when they faded, he was still there, unburnt, unmoved. Daenerys stared in disbelief. He raised his hand, and the dead rose again. Around her, fallen Unsullied, Dothraki, and even Northmen began to rise. Eyes pale, limbs stiff. Drogon screamed, panicked, trying to fly away. But the dead swarmed. Daenerys fell from his back, landing hard in the snow, surrounded, and no one was there. Not Tyrion, not Jon, not her soldiers, just death. Jorah Mormont appeared in the chaos, sword in hand, bleeding but unbroken. He fought beside her, protecting her, taking cut after cut, never backing down, until he fell, quietly, in her arms. She screamed, not just in grief, but in rage, a sound so raw it silenced even the storm for a moment. Then came Arya. From the shadows quick and silent, she leapt at the Night King, and in one swift move stabbed him with the dragon glass dagger. He shattered into ice. The army of the dead collapsed like puppets with cut strings. Silence fell over Winterfell, but the victory was not joyful. The cost had been too high. The bodies were piled higher than the wall. Grey Worm wept silently as he lit the pyres. Sansa mourned Theon. Arya said nothing. Jon stared at the dead with hollow eyes. And Daenerys stood before the flames with no words, no comfort. She had lost a dragon. She had lost Jorah. She had lost what little love the North might have offered her. The people cheered for Arya. They bowed to Jon, but to her they offered silence, and that silence echoed louder than any sword. That night, in her chambers, she stood before a mirror, her face lit by candlelight. "This was supposed to be my moment," she whispered to herself. "But they will never love me, will they?" Missandei was gone. Jorah was gone. Varys watched her carefully now. Even Tyrion seemed unsure. And Jon avoided her eyes. That night, she didn't cry. She stared into the flames and whispered, "Then, let them fear me." Winterfell had survived, but the frost hadn't left Daenerys' heart. The morning after the great battle, she stood on the walls, staring at the white fields, soaked in ash and blood. The North owed her everything, her dragon, her army, her heart, and yet they avoided her. Their eyes followed Jon. Their cheers were for Arya. Their loyalty, fragile and cold, belonged to anyone but her. The final crack had begun to spread. She met Jon that evening, alone in the hall once filled with feasts and song. He looked at her with guilt, but not love, and she saw it, felt it, the distance, the hesitation, like something had shifted. "You've been avoiding me," she said softly. "I haven't." She stepped closer. "I told you I loved you. I trusted you with everything. But ever since you learned who you are," he looked away, "you've been pulling back." Jon didn't answer at first. Then finally he whispered, "I don't want the throne." "But they do," she snapped, voice trembling. "Your name alone makes you a threat to me. Your name alone makes you a threat to me. I'll tell no one. It doesn't matter. They already know." Her voice cracked with pain, not weakness. Do you think Sansa will keep your secret? She already questions me. She smiles with her mouth, but her eyes scream betrayal. Jon tried to calm her, but it was useless. Her heart had tasted isolation too many times. In her mind, this wasn't just politics. It was survival. Later, Sansa spoke with Tyrion. She told him the truth, Jon's true parentage. She hadn't done it out of spite. She told herself it was for the realm. The North deserved to be ruled by someone they trusted. And it would never be Daenerys. The news spread like wildfire. Varys was the first to move. Quietly, in the shadows, he sent ravens to the corners of Westeros. He believed in peace, in balance, and Daenerys no longer represented either. He saw the fire building behind her eyes and knew what came next. "She's not the right ruler," Varys whispered to Tyrion. "She's skipped the lessons of pain and compromise. She only knows fire." Tyrion hesitated. "She wants to build a better world, but she's willing to burn the one we have to do it." Daenerys found out. Varys was executed the next morning. Her face was stone as she gave the order. "Dracarys," she said coldly, and Drogon turned the man into ash before he could speak another word. Jon watched, horrified. The man had once served her, had protected the realm. Now he was just dust in the wind. "You killed him without trial," Jon said later. "He betrayed me. He was trying to save the realm." Daenerys turned to him, eyes burning. "And what do you think I'm trying to do?" Jon opened his mouth but said nothing. That silence broke something inside her. The march to King's Landing began shortly after. The city had shut its gates, hiding behind the Golden Company and its high wall. Cersei stood within, certain that Daenerys wouldn't destroy the innocent, that she wouldn't become her father. But Cersei didn't understand. She wasn't facing the girl who freed slaves or broke chains. She was facing the woman who had been denied love, trust, and a future again and again, and was finally ready to stop asking for it. Outside the city, Tyrion begged Daenerys to show mercy. "Ring the bells," he pleaded. "If they surrender, if they ring the bells, don't burn the city." She nodded once, but her face remained unreadable. The next day, the attack began. Daenerys rode Drogon high above the city, the skies clear, the sun burning down on King's Landing. The Golden Company was wiped out in moments. The walls crumbled, the city panicked. The bells rang, over and over, loud and clear, surrender. Jon heard them. Tyrion heard them. Even Cersei heard them as she stood in her tower, wine glass shaking in her hand. And for one moment it seemed like it was over. But Daenerys stared down at the city, at the Red Keep, at the place her family had built, the throne that was stolen, the people who would never love her. And she realized fear was the only language they understood. With a scream, she dove. Fire rained from the skies. Streets burned. Children ran. Women cried. The Red Keep melted into rubble. The dragon's roar drowned out the bells. Mercy was dead. Jon stood frozen, watching the horror unfold. And in that moment he knew Daenerys had crossed a line no queen could return from. King's Landing burned for hours. By the time the fire died, the city was no longer a city. It was a grave. Smoke filled the air like a dark fog, and ash fell from the sky like snow. The screams had faded, replaced by silence so heavy it felt unreal. Daenerys landed Drogon near the broken steps of the Red Keep. The throne room lay ahead, half destroyed, twisted by fire and stone. She walked alone through the ruins, her boots crushing ash and bone. Her face was calm now, too calm. She had won. The Iron Throne stood at the center of the ruined hall, melted, bent, scarred. No longer a symbol of glory, but of everything it had cost. Daenerys stepped closer, reaching out, her fingers brushing the cold, broken metal. All her life, this was the end. Outside, Jon Snow moved through the destroyed streets, his sword hanging useless at his side. He helped survivors where he could, pulling children from rubble, shielding the weak from his own soldiers who had lost control. The Unsullied followed orders without question. Fear ruled them now. This wasn't victory. This was madness. Tyrion was arrested that night. His crime was mercy. He had freed his brother and begged for peace, and for that he was called a traitor. As he was dragged away, he looked at the ruins of the city and whispered, "This is what happens when rulers are never told no." The next day, Daenerys addressed her army. She stood high above them, Drogon behind her like a shadow of death. Her voice carried power, fire, belief. "They don't get to choose," she said. "They don't get to decide what is good. We will break the wheel everywhere, from Winterfell to the farthest land. Anyone who stands against us will burn." The Unsullied raised their spears. The Dothraki roared. But Jon did not cheer. That night, he visited Tyrion in chains. The two men spoke quietly, the weight of the world pressing down on them. "She won't stop," Tyrion said. "Today it's King's Landing. Tomorrow it's the world." Jon's eyes were filled with pain. "She believes she's right." "That's the most dangerous kind of ruler," Tyrion replied. "You're the only one she'll listen to." Jon knew what that meant. He went to her. Daenerys was alone in the throne room, standing before the Iron Throne but not sitting on it. When she saw him, her face softened, just a little. "You're safe," she said. "You won." Jon stepped closer. "You burned a city." "To save the world," she replied. "They would never love me, but now they'll never forget me." He looked at her, truly looked. The girl who once freed slaves, the woman who lost everything, the queen who chose fire over love. "You don't get to decide what's good," he said softly. "I do," she answered. "I know what's right." He took her hands. "What about the people who didn't choose this?" "They had a choice," she said. "They chose Cersei." Jon's voice broke. "You sound like him." Her eyes hardened. "I'm not my father." "No," Jon whispered. "You're worse." He burned enemies. "You burned everyone." For a moment, she looked unsure. Just for a heartbeat. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "Be with me," she said. "Rule with me, together." Tears filled Jon's eyes. I wish you were someone else." And then he did it. One clean move, one final act of love and duty. Daenerys gasped softly, surprise frozen on her face as she fell into his arms. Her fire faded, her dream ended. Drogon roared in pain, shaking the ruins. He found her body, nudged it gently, then looked at the Iron Throne. With one blast of fire, he destroyed it. Then he carried her away, disappearing into the sky. The war was over. Weeks later, the Lords of Westeros gathered. No throne, no crown, just survivors. Jon was offered the crown. He refused. The realm chose a new path. Not fire, not blood, but memory. Jon returned to the north, beyond the wall, not as punishment, but as peace. And the world remembered Daenerys Targaryen not as the queen who never went to Meereen, but as the queen who never learned when to stop.